Right now, one of the best electric vehicles that you can buy globally is not for sale in the US. Not because they are unsafe or that they do not meet the requirements to be an electric vehicle, but because the US government has placed a 100% tariff on electric vehicles coming from this country. They are made in addition to a connected vehicle software ban, and if you have seen any car content online in the past year or so, you will know that I am talking specifically about Chinese electric vehicles. In fact, Marks Brownlee, the prominent tech YouTuber, made a video on his channel reviewing a Chinese electric vehicle. And well, I am just going to let you listen to his intro. Yo, have you seen these Chinese electric cars? If they ever came to the US, they would cook everything that we have here. They are too good, they have too much tech, and they are too cheap to not dominate everything. And so, I figured I should get my hands on one and actually figure out if that is true or not. Now, if you watch that video until the end, he is ultimately impressed by the car and states that the car he tested specifically is a $42,000 car that feels like it would have cost $75,000 if it was made in the United States. And there are other models of Chinese electric vehicles that cost even less. Famously, the BYD Seagull sells for about $10,000 to $12,000 and comes with very high reviews. But this video is not just about cars. It is about a decision that the United States has made to systematically wall off trade with one of its biggest trading partners, and increasingly with the rest of the world as well. Over the past year, the U.S. has launched one of the most aggressive tariff campaigns in the past 100 years on sectors like automobiles, electronics, steel, aluminum, and now pharmaceuticals. The last time America made a decision like this was back in 1930, and the result was that global trade collapsed over 66% in the years following. So in this video, we are going to walk through what is actually happening and what exactly happened, the last time that we tried something like this, and what it might cost you. Of course, it will be done in a friendly and warm way, even if the subject matter seems a little daunting. I promise that you will at least be informed by the end of this video. So, the trade decision I want to cover first today is the 100% wall on Chinese-made electric vehicles. Starting in 2024, the U.S. raised tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles from 25% all the way up to 100% under the previous administration of Joe Biden. Now, after Trump took office in November of 2024, he kept those tariffs at 100%, and on top of that, there was a connected vehicle software ban that was finalized in January of 2025. There is also the EV Tax Credit Act. So in order to qualify for a $7,500 electric vehicle tax credit in the United States, your car needs to be assembled in North America and use battery materials from the U.S. or acceptable trade partners. The connected software ban, on the other hand, basically just states that any car or vehicle using Chinese or Russian linked software or hardware would not be allowed to be sold in the United States. This boils down to national security at the end of the day. The U.S. does not want their data somehow ending up in the hands of the Chinese or Russian governments. It is kind of like the same story of the TikTok story that you heard maybe last year, which was that TikTok had to be spun off to an American company in order to keep existing within America, because they did not want that data going to China. So, even if you remove the tariff of 100% tomorrow, the software ban would still keep Chinese electric vehicles out of America, and that is why it is called a wall. There is a 100% tariff which heavily disincentivizes foreign companies from selling here, as well as the software ban and the exclusion from tax incentives. Now, the Chinese electric vehicle wall is one thing, but it is actually just one piece of a much bigger pie that is the shift in U.S. trade policy as of the last couple of years. We currently also have tariff rates on every single U.S. trading partner to the point where the average U.S. tariff rates went from 2.4% to 9.6% across the board, and that is the highest it has been in 80 years. In February of 2026, so this year, the Supreme Court stepped in and ruled 6 votes to 3 votes that the law that the White House was using to enforce these tariffs were not valid. The Supreme Court basically said that the president did not have the legal authority to impose most of these tariffs, so a huge chunk of them got thrown out. But the very next day, Trump used a different law to put a 10% tariff right back on everything. Then, in April, he announced a new round of tariffs on steel, aluminum, and copper, plus up to 100% on pharmaceutical imports. In addition to these policies, there are also artificial intelligence chip export controls, where companies can export artificial intelligence chips. Yes, like the NVIDIA H-Ardenine or the AMD M-Arshawu X chips, but they must pay the U.S. government 15% of their revenues from the sales, and that is somewhat unprecedented. Export controls are being used as a tool for generating revenue and also national security, so that is pretty interesting. So, what we are really ultimately ending up with right now is that America is starting to look more and more protectionist. Protectionism is where a government uses tariffs and quotas to shield domestic industries from foreign competition. The idea being is that if you make foreign products more expensive, people will buy American products instead, and therefore protect American jobs. That was the entire premise of having the tariff in the first place, which was to liberate the U.S. economy from trade deficits and bring manufacturing back to the United States. And that sounds all somewhat reasonable. I am all for America first. But does it actually work in practice? To answer that question, let us look at the last time we did something like this in the U.S., and that was in 1930. So back then, by way of President Herbert Hoover, he passed an act called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. Now, I learned a little bit about this in my AP U.S. history class, but it essentially raised import duties on over 20,000 items that would come into the U.S. from foreign trade partners. The logic back then for this act was basically the same as it is today. America first, protect American farmers and manufacturers, and disincentivizes foreign competition. This also came at a very sensitive time in American history. Just 1 year after the Great Depression started in October of 1929. Now, what was fascinating to me was that when I was researching this bill, over 1,000 economists actually signed a petition begging President Hoover at the time to not sign this tariff act. And the more surprising part was that the president actually agreed. He called the bill obnoxious and opposed the bill. But here's the kicker. He still signed it anyway, feeling political pressure from his own party, his cabinet, and various business partners. So, the bill went into place, and while it was initially successful in reducing foreign goods, in the period of the 5 years after the bill was enacted, U.S. imports decreased 66% from $4.4 billion in 1929 to $1.5 billion in 1933. U.S. exports to Europe also dropped from $23 billion to $784 million. So after a period of time, by all measures, this bill was considered a disaster, and the Great Depression being well underway did not help that fact either. In the early 1930s, the next president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he passed the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act of 1934, and the U.S. spent the next 70 years building a global free trade system. This included the World Trade Organization, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. All these acts basically stem from how protectionism had failed so miserably back in 1930. So now that you know that little bit of history, let us actually take a look into how today's trade policies are actually playing out and what it is costing you. We have already talked about the wall keeping Chinese electric vehicles out in particular, but what about the entire automobile sector in general? Because no car assembled in the United States is 100% made here, given the global nature of the automotive industry. There are usually at least some parts of a U.S. assembled vehicle that have parts from another country. Even Tesla, with all of their factories in the United States, will still source some of their parts from other countries. So when you enact these tariffs on imported steel, aluminum, and auto parts, we are not only seeing foreign cars becoming more expensive, but also domestically produced cars. JP Morgan has estimated that combined tariffs on vehicles and parts will cost the industry about $41 billion in year 1, rising to $52 billion by year 3, which translates to an increase in cost of about $3,258 per vehicle. Kelley Blue Book estimates that for vehicles priced under $40,000, tariffs are adding up to $6,000 more to the sticker price, and Audi has already raised prices on most of its 2026 lineup, between $800 to $4,100 per model. Forecasts for auto sales in the United States have also dropped for the remainder of this year, citing problems with not only tariffs, but the ongoing conflict in Iran and oil prices. All the while, BYD has just passed Tesla as the world's #1 electric vehicle seller, and China is now not only the largest global auto manufacturer, but their electric vehicles account for nearly 70% of the global electric vehicle production. So, it is my take that these restrictions on trade in this sector specifically are causing us to slowly fall behind. It is kind of like in Settlers of Catan. If you are not the player trading resources, you are falling behind other players who are doing the trading, and if China is willing to trade with countries like Canada, the UK, and Mexico, while we sit behind the wall, we increase our chances of being the player that loses the game of Catan and global trade eventually. So, that is the automobile sector, more expensive across the board, and I feel like we are falling behind. But it does not really stop there because electronics is another big sector that has got to get even more expensive. Morningstar expects durable goods prices of electronics, toys, tools, and small appliances to rise 4.5% in 2026. and we can already see some of this becoming evident. Last year, all three major video game console makers raised their prices. So Sony raised the PlayStation 5 prices in August of 2025, Microsoft raised Xbox Series prices in October, and the Nintendo Switch 2 launched at $450, which was a $150 jump from the Switch 1. In addition, all five major PC manufacturers, including Lenovo, Dell, HP, Acer, and Asus, have warned of 15 to 20% price hikes heading into the second half of 2026. TrendForce, a major industry research firm, found that a mainstream $900 laptop could see its cost increase by nearly 40%, meaning that same laptop could cost you over $1,200 by the end of this year. Of course, tariffs are not the only reason this is going on. There is also a massive memory shortage going on right now because artificial intelligence data centers, they create so much demand for chips and memory, and this shift in demand is causing companies like Samsung or Micron to shift production away from those types of chips, the consumer chips, and more towards the artificial intelligence chips. And if I were a chip maker, I would probably do the same. If all the artificial intelligence chips are in demand, and that is actually what is going to give me the most profit, I am going to obviously shift my resources to making artificial intelligence chips rather than consumer chips. The analogy here is like if I owned a supply store during the gold rush in the 1850s, and all of a sudden, I see shovels selling at 10 times the rate compared to jeans. I am probably going to carry a lot more shovels at my general supply store compared to jeans, because that is where the demand is. But as a result, the people that are wanting jeans, the regular people, are going to suffer. So take a look at some of these charts from the Wall Street Journal. Not only does memory as a percentage of manufacturing costs of a device make up typically 20 to 35% for most consumer electronics, the average contract prices of DRAM and memory are up as well. In addition, you have worldwide smartphone and PC shipments projected to be down this year. The US also has tariffs on semiconductors from Chinese suppliers. So, you already have all these forces working against creating chips for consumer devices plus the additional tariff. Therefore, the entire supply chain for electronics is already hamstrung, and I feel like the prices to consumers are just going to get worse. Still, though, it probably might not be as bad as the newest sector that is becoming affected by trade policies, and that is the pharmaceutical sector. On April 2, 2026, exactly 1 year after the Liberation Day tariffs, President Trump signed an executive order imposing 100% tariffs on patented pharmaceutical products and their active ingredients. Now, the good news is that it does not affect a lot of generic drugs, but here is exactly how it works. So if a drug company has signed a pricing deal with the administration and is building manufacturing in the United States, they will not pay a tariff if you are a company that is just planning to build here, but you have not finished yet. The tariff is 20% and then it goes up to 100% in 4 years. And if you have not made any single deal at all with the administration, it is just going to be a flat 100%. Now, the interesting part here is that 14 out of the major 17 drug companies have already signed deals with the administration, and a lot of the pricing deals actually look pretty good. For example, Ozempic or Wegovy, which are the GLP-1s used to cost patients over $1,000 a month, and they are going to be now available for around $350 a month. Some drugs like insulin from Novo Nordisk will be capped at $35 a month. I think that happened a little bit prior to the April 2, 2026, but still, it was in effect. Eli Lilly also has a weight management drug called Zepbound, which has already dropped to $300 to $350 a month after working with the Trump administration. Now, the problem and the bigger concern is that a lot of the U.S. pharmaceutical supply chain is still dependent on foreign production, especially from countries like China or India, according to the Food and Drug Administration. More than 80% of the manufacturing sites for active pharmaceutical ingredients are located outside of the country, and that China and India together supply more than 70% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients used in U.S. drug manufacturing. And just like the car sector, if a drug has any active pharmaceutical ingredients from another country, they will pay that country's tariff rate. But the part that is really concerning is that while generic drugs are currently exempt from tariffs for now, the White House said that they will reassess that in a year if generic drugs end up getting hit. Important drugs like antibiotics, cancer treatments, blood pressure medication, arthritis medication, that might go up in price as well. I just do not know what the downstream effects of those are going to be in the future. So we can clearly see that the trade strategy or the trade decision that is around national security and protectionism ends up snowballing into tariffs across one sector and then another sector and then another. Cars are already more expensive. electronics are becoming more expensive, and your medication might be next. So let us talk about what all of this actually costs you as a consumer and what you can do about it. The Tax Foundation estimates that tariffs currently in effect amount to roughly $1,500 in additional costs per American household in 2026. And Yale University's Budget Lab puts it at between $600 and $1,300. Whichever number you use, it is clear to me that Americans are now paying more for a lot of goods, not just limited to the ones I talked about today either. The whole argument was that these policies will bring manufacturing back home to the U.S., but I would actually argue that when the U.S. is not engaging in free trade, like it has in the past, it actually makes us weaker, because countries will trade without us. For example, some of the biggest trade deals of the year so far have been the European Union signing a free trade agreement with India. The conclusion there is that India will eliminate or reduce tariffs on 97% of EU goods, and that the EU will eliminate tariffs on 89.5% of Indian imports over 7 years. Another big trade deal is that Canada struck a deal with China to cut tariffs on electric vehicles, the very same electric vehicles that we do not have access to, and in that deal, China agreed to cut tariffs on Canadian canola oil. But in America, imports from China have declined by $135 billion in the last year relative to 2024. However, imports from the 13 other Asian nations included in a report increased by a cumulative $193 billion. So it seems like even if we have reduced our reliance on some countries' imports, we are just shifting that demand elsewhere. So I do want to say it is still early. Some of these factory investments could pay off in 5 or 10 years. But as of right now, we are paying higher prices. I think that we are falling behind in key technologies, and the rest of the world is making deals without us. If the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act taught us anything, it is that once you start incorporating walls and tariffs and protectionism, other countries are going to retaliate, and that is just the natural reaction of other nations. So, what can you actually do about it as of right now? Are there any actionable steps that you can take to hedge against these trade policies? I think there are 3. Number 1, if you are planning a major purchase, whether that is a car, laptop, or cell phone, I would say just to do it as soon as you can because I do not think waiting will get you a better deal. Prices are all projected to go up in the second half of 2026 and not down. So I would definitely look at buying things sooner rather than later. Number 2, if you are on any type of branded medication, I would talk to your doctor about generic alternatives. Generic drugs will hopefully stay tariff exempt. Now, if your insurance covers your drugs, that is a good thing. But if you do not have the best health insurance and you are also dependent on some type of brand named pharmaceutical drug, I would definitely at least check with your doctor or your hospital just to know what the implications of the costs are going to be moving forward. Number 3 is to really think about your consumption of everything. US trade policies and tariffs are just essentially consumption taxes. The more you consume of imported goods, the more you are probably going to pay. So on this channel, I like to buy fewer things, but hopefully of higher quality if you can avoid impulse purchases in a tariff environment. I think that is not only a good financial mindset to have, it is just a practical saving strategy. Now, from an investing perspective, I think that these trade policies are going to cause inflation. I mean, they already kind of have. And so that means if you are sitting in cash right now, your purchasing power is decreasing as we speak. One way to hedge against that is to keep investing in the markets, and adding some international stock exposure can help you hedge against this as well. While we do not know what the effects of these policies are going to be in the long term, I am personally just not optimistic on keeping America gated from the rest of the world. A lot of people are going to point out that the stock market is really great because of all the progress in the artificial intelligence space. For example, the S&P 500 is near all-time highs. However, I am going to say that the stock market is not the economy, and many people are arguing that the economy is not doing as great. We are seeing mass layoffs across many different companies right now, as well as many things getting more expensive. So, I am just really not confident that everything is just going to be perfect and dandy for the next few years, as many stock market bulls are. Of course, I would love to hear your comments on what you think if you have a counterpoint, or similarly if you resonate with this video. Let me know down below. Again, thank you for joining me in another video on this channel. This was a little bit of a different one compared to the stuff I usually put out. So if you enjoyed it, you might also like my video on Japan's debt realities that I covered recently. If you like economics and market news, I think you would enjoy that analysis. So I will see you guys in that one or a future one on the channel. Alright, peace out.